Good morning, everybody. My apologies that I could not travel to Odense today to be there with you, but I'm very happy to be able to speak to you in this way. And I will describe the work that I've been doing not only at research level, but also at the policy and governance level with many organizations across the world and in Europe on the issue of responsible artificial intelligence. I always like to start this discussion on what is responsible artificial intelligence, and why do we need responsible artificial intelligence, with the question of my slides are now. The question of what is AI, and especially in policy and governance circles, the discussion usually goes very wild and very wide. Many see AI as business as usual, as the next step in digitization, and other ones are looking at AI as something almost magic, something which we don't really understand what it is, we don't really understand how it does what it does, but seemingly it's useful, but at the same time has impact in our world. Traditional definitions of AI, and I don't really want to go into the discussion of the definition of AI, but traditional views of AI systems include issues of autonomy, of adaptability and interaction. So these are, and they usually address the software, the computational components of the algorithm, the data, the program, the code, if you like. What is important to realize is that when we talk about this code, these programs, it's that they are neither artificial nor intelligent. They are not intelligent in the sense that for a large part of the systems which we are using nowadays, which are very good at identifying patterns, at defining predictions based on those patterns, are still very far from what we would call an intelligent person. They are not able to understand the meaning of what they are, the data that they are observing. They are not able to deal with situations in which there are very little data, and they are usually very bad at abstracting from the situations in which the data is about. It's also not artificial because all AI systems as we see them nowadays are very much based on the work of a lot of people, those ones who develop them, but also the ones who collect and take the data, the ones who govern and provide them, but they are also using a lot of natural resources in terms of energy, in terms of ground materials and so on. So it is much more than just the AI, the artificial intelligence that we like to talk about as something outside and different from us, but it's really much much less intelligent and much less artificial than what we often like to think them about. What is important to realize is whatever the capabilities of these systems, the capabilities of these programs, these computational models, they are the AI system in itself is not just the program, not just the computational system. It is part of a social technical ecosystem, including the people and organizations that develop, manage, provide, and govern these type of systems. And therefore, we do need to, when we talk about responsible intelligence, responsible artificial intelligence, we need to address this whole social technical ecosystem, not just the programs or the computer systems themselves. And why? Responsible artificial intelligence is about recognizing that AI has the capability to do a lot. The question is, what should AI be doing when? Who is going to decide? That's then the question which comes directly after that. And it is an issue of power balance or power imbalance in the case, because those who decide what AI can do and those that decide that we should be using AI systems for whatever type of situation are also the ones who are setting the values and setting the priorities for what these systems should be doing. And here is where a responsibility and trustworthiness and accountability comes from. So we do need to address this from a participatory and inclusive way, in which the discussion about which values and those values, the prioritization of these values needs to be wider than those that control and decide about the systems. And these issues of power really have led to many concerns about how AI is being developed and used nowadays. Of course, the issues of bias, which have been a constant in the discussions of the last years. It is an issue of more than just the biased data. It's also an issue of who and why is the data being collected, how is this data being used, how are the systems being developed, who is involved in the development of the systems. It's a wide question, and it's a question that cannot be answered by those that develop or research the systems, the computational systems themselves. Issues of explanation, which is also needs to address the context and the understandability of the explanation to those that require the explanation. It's another of the concerns. Issues of diversity, not only in terms of how AI is addressing the world, but also who is developing AI, and the issues of inclusion, the issues of the lack of diversity in the research, those that research AI and those that develop AI are issues which are of concern to all of us, because in a way they impact and determine how AI systems are being developed. But also one issue which we cannot really forget, and especially in these weeks in which the COP is happening in Glasgow at the same time as we are speaking, is also the cost of developing AI. How much is AI, the way we are using it, this cycle of getting more data to and more computational power to achieve a higher level of accuracy needs to be addressed. Is accuracy the value or the priority in the development of AI? How much do we need to further push on accuracy when we know that this push to accuracy might have negative impacts in the use of energy and computational power by the AI systems, are issues that really need to be discussed and addressed. Alongside the strengthening the possibilities of applying AI to support the solutions of climate problems that we address at this moment. So these are issues that are still not very much discussed, but we really need to start addressing much more. What is the cost of AI? What are the values or the priorities that we want to put on the accuracy of the AI system, and how much that impacts other values that we also need to address. So we need to start also at the same time discussing which are the decisions that we want AI systems to make. Are the decisions about our motives or about our plans? Are decisions about the individual user itself, or decisions that benefit the group of society in general? Is about issues of balancing. We know that we cannot have all values at the same time. How do we prioritize? How we combine the different, and who decides in terms of which priorities do we need to take, because we know that we cannot have it all. And that is also understanding that AI and the impact of AI is in a space in which not everything that is morally acceptable is also what is directly accepted in society, and those are difficulties that the society is addressing in many different ways. And also in some cases, morals and acceptability, it's not always aligned with legality. And how do we end up or decide on how and when to use AI needs to address this dichotomy between the different pulls and pushes that these directions have in the ways that decisions are taken, and the understanding that this setup is contextual, and the decision that might be fitting in one context might not address the same problems in another context. So responsible AI is understanding that we have to address issues of legality, issues of ethics, of alignment with the fundamental human rights and principles, but also understanding that the systems that are developed need to be reliable, need to do what they are supposed to do, and need to be verifiable in the sense that we can guarantee that the legality, the alignment with ethics, and the reliability of the system is formally and guaranteedly aligned with the high-level principles that the systems address. And again, here I'm not talking not just about the computational system, but about this whole social technical system. So if you talk about responsible AI, the principles that come with it, the so-called ART principles, are about the accountability, responsibility, and transparency, which don't mean just solely in terms of the computational characteristics of the systems, but really understanding that, for instance, if we are using software with some level of autonomy, somewhere on this social technical ecosystem in the organizations and the people involved, we need to put the demands for responsibility. If the software is interacting with the people and societies, somewhere in this ecosystem, we need to lay the demands for accountability and explanation. And again, if the systems are adaptable, we do need to demand some level of transparency, not just in terms of the so-called opening the black box, the algorithmic black box, but also transparency in terms of the motives, the decisions, and the choices that have been made in the development process of these systems. Fortunately, there is a lot of work being done in terms of the principles and guidelines that can support the trustworthy, ethical, and responsible development of AI systems. There is hardly any organization in the world which have not, in one way or another, addressing these issues. Many of them are still and very much relevant and quoted by and reused by many others. For instance, the principles and the guidelines for trustworthy AI by the European Commission, but also the ethics in action efforts of IEEE and OECD principles of artificial intelligence are all central to many of the discussions in the field of what is responsible AI and how are we going to demand and to implement this type of principles. What is good to know is that because there are so many, it shows that it is an issue that is of relevance for many different organizations. It might be confusing because one will not know which of the principles to follow, but on the other hand, it's also good to see that the principles in itself, they are not very different from each other. What this shows is that, of course, no one wants irresponsible or unethical AI systems, but at the same time, the type of narratives, the way that these principles and these recommendations are described are of such a high level that it's easy or easier to understand and to agree on these high-level principles such as transparency or accountability or well-being and so on. What is then what needs to next to be done is really to move from these high-level principles, with whom we all more or less agree, to ways to implement and to operationalize these systems. It's easy to say that we want the system to be fair. To be fair, it's much more complex to agree on what is fairness and then to implement that what is agreed into a computational system. And those are the steps that really need to be addressed in the coming time. Also understanding that these principles are not so much principles about software or about computation, but really principles about us, about the people involved in the development and the use of these systems. There are many ways, moving from defining the principles to the implementation of the principles. There are many ways to address this operationalization. A well-known one here in Europe is, of course, the regulation efforts from the European Commission, the AI Act, which is mostly focusing on AI systems that are human-centered and human-directed. So those that have in one easy and visible way end user, and the proposal of the European Union is to take a risk-based approach in which those systems that have a higher risk of impact or a higher risk in terms of the technology used are addressed differently in the regulation than those with low risk of impact or of technology use. But the regulation is only one of the possible ways to operationalize responsibility in AI. Other organizations, and typically the IEEE or the ISO, are looking at standards. Standards are, in a sense, not mandatory like a regulation, but companies and organizations adhere to standards, not only to demonstrate due diligence and to limit their liabilities, but also to provide an easy and friendly way and to integrate between different products and different algorithms, different solutions. In industry, we also see a lot of development in terms of defining or implementing ethical advisory panels or ethical officers, which in some meant to set and monitor the ethical guidelines as the organization itself wants to see them. And in some cases, this type of panels or this type of positions are also able to veto or to ask for changes in the projects or deliverables or products that the company is developing that are seen not to adhering to their own guidelines. There is also a lot of discussion and a lot of problems with this type of advisory panels, but still is one possible way to look at how to operationalize the principles of trustworthy and responsible AI. There is also a lot of work done in supporting organizations to assess their own alignment with this type of principles by developing assessment lists and monitoring frameworks, realizing that responsible AI is more than ticking some boxes and in some lists, but still addressing the need to support developing and increasing the maturity and awareness of organizations in terms of how they are addressing these systems. But of course, all of this requires a much larger effort and investment on education and training, such that all of us, the general public, the policymakers, the developers, are much more aware of the possibilities of what AI systems can do, what they cannot do, but also increasing that the level of participation in all of these type of discussions on how and when and where to use AI systems and how those systems are being implemented in the societies in which we live. So we can take responsibility not only by looking at the behavior or the results of the software, which is a traditional way that has been looking at the responsibility, especially from the perspective of those that research or developing the system. So this ethics by design, privacy by design, fairness by design, it looks at and focus on the behavior of the systems themselves. But at the same time, we really need to look at the development process. What are the choices? Who is involved? How are the decisions being made? Which options have been considered during the lifetime of developing and implementing and using the AI systems? And at the same time, of course, all stakeholders, developers, policymakers, providers, managers, and so on, all need also to understand what is our own individual responsibility and how do we take this responsibility as groups. So there are many ways to address the issue, and we really need to focus not only on the by design, but also the including on the processes and on our own motivations and efforts. If we look at the design processes, one of the most important, or development process, one of the most important issues is to realize that indeed we are talking in one side at very high level abstract type of values like fairness or security or sustainability, which need then to be interpreted, and we need to have means to discuss and to agree on the interpretation of these values, and then in the concretization or the implementation of these interpretations into the functionalities of the systems. So it's easy to talk about fairness, like I said before, but how we agree what is fairness and how to implement that in our computational systems. Those are the issues that really require much bigger effort in the coming times in ways that are open, transparent, and participatory. So we want to have it in ways that we can evaluate the choices and options there, to measure how different possible interpretation can be compared to each other, and of course making sure that it's implementable. And taking into account and realizing that all of this is always aligned with the context in which we are talking. So if you look at these very well-known cartoons describing how fairness or how equity can be understood in many different ways, and the impact of those different interpretations of fairness here as a way of distributing boxes, if we want, in a specific context, we really need to understand that the possible interpretations are all contextual and their results are different depending on the context. However, still a lot of the effort that is being done currently in terms of looking at algorithmic transparency, looking at fairness in implementations of fairness in algorithms or explainable AI, we tend to focus very much on the solution and often ignore the context in which that solution has been developed. So we really need to have the means and the possibilities, but also the discussion about the understanding that the choices and the implementations need to be explicit in order to be able to discuss them, but also understand that they are contextual. Just to finalize before we go to the panel and to some time for questions, at my research group in Umeå, we are looking at the formal verification, the issues of assessment and monitoring, so both what I just talked about, the contextualization and interpretation of many different systems in terms of this value-sensitive design approach that I described to. We are developing frameworks and tools for supporting the assessment and monitoring of different implementations of systems across the life cycle of the development, and aligned with different guidelines and principles that are available, such as the European high-level expert group Trustworthy AI assessment list, but other ones. And at the same time, we are also working on providing some platform for awareness and knowledge sharing in terms of a weekly seminar that we take on Fridays at lunchtime, in which we provide a platform for anyone and everybody to discuss online new developments in AI in a multidisciplinary way from many different perspectives, and also from PhD research to high level and experts from industry to academy. Everybody is welcome to talk and to present at these seminars in a way that we, all of us, can learn from each other. So I would like to stop here with the very short overview. Yes, AI can do a lot. AI systems are really have the potential to help us solve many of the problems and issues complex issues in our world, but we need to use them in a responsible way. We need to address the question zero, the question of should we use AI here, and understanding that this question comes with the power issue. So those who decide are the ones who have the power to decide are the ones that will direct the AI systems in one way or another. But at the same time, it's important to realize that AI applications, AI systems are not magic, are artifacts that we make. So we set the purpose, and we people need to have the discussion about what is the purpose for these systems, because AI can give us a lot of answers, but we are the ones who ask the questions. Thank you.